So the standard model of communication is this holistic attempt to account for and describe all the major attributes and components that are at play in just about any communication interactions. Just like any model, it's not going to be a perfect description of everything that might necessarily be happening, but as a model, it is useful because it gives us a way to identify these kind of different moving parts that happen in communication, and most importantly, identify all these areas where communication might break down. In the original model, there were four main parts: the sender, the message, the channel, and the receiver. So the sender is going to be the person or institution that initiates any form of communication, and the message is any form of symbolic representation that contains information or an inquiry from the sender to someone else. That's kind of a bit of a wordy definition, so the way I like to think about the message is just any way that you're going to take an idea and put it into a particular form so that way you can convey it or transmit that to someone else. The channel is the form or medium in which that message is traveling or being sent. So the sender takes an idea, puts it into a message, and sends it through a particular channel, and then the person or institution on the other end of that communicative act is going to be the receiver, the person or institution for which that sender is preparing a particular message. So those were the first four parts in this standard model of communication. We have built upon that in the years since it was originally developed and added a couple of other important descriptors to get at some other parts of this communication process. First is this idea of encoding and decoding. So a message isn't something that just comes into being, and in fact there's actually some work that goes into getting an idea from someone's head, putting it into a message so that way it can be in a form for someone to actually understand. So encoding is the work that a sender does to put the message into a format that's appropriate for communication in the particular setting. So depending on the context, depending on the situation, and the particular channel, so is it going to be a face-to-face channel, or are we communicating via Skype? Is it face-to-face but in an auditorium? Depending on all these contexts, you're going to need to encode the message perhaps differently. Decoding is on the other side of that process. That's the work that any receiver does to translate the speaker's encoding into a form that they can interpret and understand. Encoding and decoding, this is often where communication breaks down, where someone tries to put the idea into a particular message, but it doesn't get decoded in the same way, and so there's a misunderstanding. Another aspect of the standard model of communication is feedback. This is important for us to recognize that communication is not just a one-way process. It's not just a speaker talking at a receiver, but also that there is valuable feedback coming the other direction, where the audience might be providing verbal or nonverbal signals about is the message being received appropriately and what is their reaction to it. And then finally, noise is anything that interferes with the successful transmission of a message. So noise can be literal noise. So think about back when we were in the actual classroom, there was that really loud fan in the back of the room that sometimes made it difficult to hear. But it can also be less obvious forms that might interfere with this communication process. So for instance, if you have a headache, or maybe you're really hungry and it's really hard for you to pay attention to the speaker, that's technically a form of noise that might interfere with the ability for you to understand that message. So overall, is the standard of model communication a perfect representation of every time you're speaking to somebody? No. However, it is a good approximation of just about every communicative act, and helps us identify all these bits and pieces that are at play anytime that one person is trying to convey information and transmit a message to someone else. So understanding the standard model of communication is important because it gives us a way to understand kind of holistically this communication process and identify any places where it sometimes breaks down.